welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism, pro-worker, pro-family, pro-community, and especially pro-America. It's now 2 years since the first case of coronavirus. Last year, in April, I issued a warning about what might happen if we allowed our response to the pandemic to continue as it was. We need to watch out for a big government takeover. We've already seen a massive expansion in government spending and control, and there's more coming, potentially snooping on your health and your movements, telling you where you can go and what you can do. There's the danger of a big business takeover. People say, isn't it great that Amazon and Walmart and others are hiring hundreds of thousands right now? Of course it's good that people have jobs, but what's happening is small businesses dying and big business feasting on the remains. Well, look where we are. That is exactly what happened. Government got bigger and bigger and gets bigger each passing day. 3 bailout bills in March of 2020, another in April, then in December, then another in March of this year. A total of nearly $6 trillion spent just on this. That's nearly 50% more than 2019's entire federal budget. And it's not just the size of the spending, it's what they did with it. They took over vast swathes of the economy and everyday life. Hundreds of millions of Americans almost overnight became dependent on the government and its giant, sprawling bureaucracies. And people might say, government had to do it. You can't let people starve, throw families out on the street. But that argument only works in the event of some unavoidable disaster. This was a deliberate, man-made disaster, a government-made disaster. Those multi-trillion-dollar bailouts, they weren't compensating people and businesses for the virus. They were compensation for the lockdowns, the curfews, the stay-at-home orders, all of which were totally avoidable. There was absolutely no need, not on scientific grounds, not on public health grounds, to shut down the economy the way we did. As we said from the start, the right response to this pandemic, the science-based response, was a targeted focus on those at risk. But instead, we had the madness of blanket lockdowns, an off-the-shelf plan written for a completely different situation by this person, Sarah Cody, Public Health Director of Santa Clara County, right here where I live in the Bay Area of California. She imposed the nation's first lockdown. Soon after, it was copied by the other Bay Area counties. Then Gavin Newsom shut down California, and before you know it, we'd shut down America. Sarah Cody's shutdown manual was written after 9/11 for a potential bioterrorism attack. Fauci, at the federal level, pushing the lockdown madness based on his experience with AIDS, an old playbook for a different disease. But this virus, as we now know, most likely engineered in a lab as a result of reckless experiments commissioned by Fauci in defiance of Obama and Trump administration rules, it was totally different to a bioterrorism attack or even another virus that would hit the population equally. This virus had very specific characteristics. We knew that most people had mild or zero symptoms. Young, healthy people were barely at risk. We could clearly identify those most vulnerable, the elderly, the overweight, those with existing medical conditions. We said it right from the start. Let's come together to protect the vulnerable, stop the total shutdown for everyone, and start the total protection of the elderly and those most likely to need hospitalization. Don't turn a public health crisis into America's worst catastrophe. That was March 2020. There was no need to close schools so parents couldn't go to work, no need to shut everything down. The whole thing was mad, completely mad. And now, as we look back, we have to ask, did the politicians and the bureaucrats and the technocrats do all this deliberately to make themselves more powerful? Political scientist James Q. Wilson wrote in his classic Bureaucracy what government agencies do and why they do it, that the goal of every bureaucracy is to increase its power. And that's what they've done in a way that was inconceivable just 2 years ago, telling us when we can work, what we can do, where we can go, who we can see. Wear a mask, wash your hands, keep your distance, show your papers. Sit down, stand up, turn around. We're the government and we can make you do anything. It wasn't just unscientific, it was sadistic. It revealed the sickness that infects so much of our ruling elite. There's a very specific term for it: megalomania, the addiction to power and control. And the bigger government got, the more incompetent it was revealed to be. Just this week, an audit found that Louisiana improperly paid out millions in unemployment. But that's just amateur incompetence compared to California. $31 billion wasted by the California Employment Department. Unemployment checks sent to people in jail, people in other countries, gangs of criminals. Even a scammer posing as Senator Dianne Feinstein got one. $76 billion wasted by the federal government, who seem to be handing out our money to any applicant with a pulse. And it wasn't just the giant examples of incompetence that were so infuriating. It was the small ones too. Wasting food meant for those who couldn't afford it. Assembling a contact tracing army that turned out to be completely useless. Shuffling homeless people into hotels, then out again as neighborhood families complained, and no wonder. In San Francisco, they turned one of them into a meth lab. And the big government takeover still goes on. Look at the vaccine mandates. Biden's federal mandate, totally illegal, thrown out by the courts for its utter incoherence and unconstitutionality. So are they dropping it? No, they're pressing ahead. Look at these outrageous emergency declarations, illegally and unconstitutionally grabbing power in direct contravention of everything America stands for and was built on. Gavin Newsom just renewed his emergency declaration for a third time. Permanent pandemic, so they can boss us around forever. And guess who's gotten rich on the back of this big government power grab? Big government's co-conspirator, of course, big business. Jeff Bezos sweeping in to feed off the carcass of millions of small businesses killed, murdered by the politicians and bureaucrats. Amazon's workforce up by over 600,000 as local employees had to let people go. Bezos' wealth up by nearly $100 billion as entrepreneurs' dreams were crushed. As these cruel politicians shut down your local store, they let their donors' stores stay open. Target, Walmart, Safeway, why are they more essential than a local shop that's been at the heart of its community for 100 years and now sits boarded up, its owners' lives shattered, while the fat cats count their billions? Bars, restaurants, gyms, barbershops, nail salons, so many millions of small local businesses destroyed by big government while their big business competitors with all the lawyers and lobbyists were allowed to stay open. And guess who's making money off all the stupid rules and bureaucracy, the endless maddening apps and forms and health questionnaires and the testing? Big business, of course. It is honestly a crime against society, all of it. And we must not stand for it. We must make them pay for it. We must fight back and take our power back. It's in the Declaration of Independence. When a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Yes, that's what we've had to put up with, a long train of abuses and usurpations. And yes, it is time to throw off such government. That's the next revolution we need. Tell us what you think at Steve Hilton X and at NextRevFNC, and share this message when we post it. Let's bring in our first guest, author of the upcoming book, A Plague Upon Our House, My Fight at the Trump White House to Stop COVID from Destroying America, Trump Administration COVID Special Advisor, Dr. Scott Atlas. I'm so excited to see you, Scott. So much to talk about. Let's just start with the madness of it all. I mean, one of the really strong things that comes out of your brilliant book is that this sort of terrible troika of public health bureaucrats running all this, Dr. Birx, Fauci, Robert Redfield at the CDC, what they were pushing, despite all their claims, was basically unscientific.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve. I mean, let's start from the beginning. The difference between those three doctors on the task force and myself were, Birx, Fauci, these are people that were in government bureaucrat positions for 40 years. I came out of 15 plus years of health policy scholarship, where I've been working full-time for a decade. Before that, 25 years of academic medicine at the highest level. Their policies were approach based on I don't know. My policies were an approach based upon coming in with dozens of world's scientific literature in my hands and going through the data in a critical thinking way. This is how a scientist or anyone on policy should be doing things. You have to consider the design of the studies before you make a conclusion. But more than that, the difference between me and them was I'm talking about all health. These people were focused on stopping COVID-19 at all costs. That's immoral, frankly, and not the appropriate way to design health policy. Health policy means everything that's going on, including the impact of the policy. So what they recommended was this lockdown, closures of businesses, closures of schools, curfews, restrictions of personal freedom, and absent medical care for anything non-COVID. I said something like you were saying back from actually in March, which was increasing the protection of the people we know who have a risk to die,
right,
and stopping the massive, enormous harms of the lockdowns that really sacrificed our own children and really destroyed lower income people. We have to remember lockdowns are a luxury of the rich, the affluent, the elites. The regular people with jobs, they can't have their businesses on Zoom, and their children were destroyed. As we know, we could cite statistic after statistic. Not only that, just to make the final point here, the lockdowns failed. The lockdowns were implemented all over the country, almost every single state, the whole year, before, during, and after I was there. The lockdowns failed to stop the dying, they failed to stop the spread of the infection, and they destroyed millions of people, including our own children.
Exactly right. So well put. And let's just focus on one example of it, because to me it was so shocking that as information and data and studies emerged, they didn't adjust at all their thinking. So the whole kind of the endless mantra about 6 feet social distancing, that was based on the notion that it was spread through droplets, right? And the droplets are heavy and then they fall on the ground and it's roughly 6 feet. But then pretty early on, it was established that a big part of the transmission is through aerosols that travel in the air like 30 feet, 40 feet. So the idea that you're going to stop it with the 6 feet social distancing is ludicrous. But they didn't change that policy at all. Same with about wiping down surfaces, all this stuff.
Consistent pattern of ignoring the facts. I mean, by the way, many countries in the world use 3 feet. They did from the beginning, including and to this day now. 6 feet, the studies have come out, as you just mentioned, saying that there was no difference between 6 feet and 3 feet because much of the infection is spread through simply breathing aerosolized gases, basically. And yet we never change a policy. We never change a policy on stopping this fanatic wiping of services. You go on an airplane, not only have they already cleaned the surfaces, then the people are grabbing alcohol pads. You know, we sit here and double down on the lowest risk environments. Schools are very low risk. Healthy children have an extremely low risk of the disease, and they've only rarely spread the disease. This is proven for over a year and a half, yet we double down on schools. Airlines, there's never been significant outbreaks of cases. This is before vaccines. Everyone's vaccinated now, yet we double down on airlines. You hear every 5 minutes an announcement about putting masks on between chewing bites of food. I mean, this is a complete denial of science, a complete denial, unique to the United States, by the way, of just ignoring the natural immunity after recovering from the infection.
Okay, it's so mad. Very quickly, a last question. I've been dying to ask you this. So, in your view, who's worst, right, of the terrible troika? Dr. Birx, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Redfield. Who's the biggest villain on that list for you?
Okay, I'm not going to answer it that way, but I'll answer it this way. People don't understand something. Dr. Birx was the official task force coordinator. She was the head of all the medical advice. She gave all the written advice to every single state. She visited dozens of states. She was the official federal policy. If you don't like what happened with the federal policy that was implemented, you must wonder about the people who advised the policy that was implemented. That means Dr. Birx and Fauci mainly, Fauci through his public TV appearances and media appearances. And so there's this Orwellian attempt now by them to rewrite history, to blame those of us who criticize what was implemented for the failure of what was implemented. And these were the people that advised what was implemented.
Exactly. Well, listen, thank you so much for writing this book. Everyone should get this book. It was this hugely important contribution to our understanding of what happened. Scott Atlas, great to see you. All right, let's bring in our next guest, small business expert Carol Roth. Carol